We all love rankings in fantasy football, don't we? This player is better than this player is better than this player. There is so much potential for arguments. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of potential for nuanced analysis. Linear rankings lack context, especially in Dynasty, where there are so many factors that we have to consider when evaluating a player. Linear rankings just don't tell us why one player is more valuable than another. Linear rankings cannot possibly encapsulate age and projected production and market value and everything that a manager needs to make decisions in their individual league. I'm not saying we should never use rankings. I think they have their place. They're just not the end all be all of player evaluation. Today, I'd like to show you a new way of thinking about wide receivers in Dynasty. Before we get started today, I just have a fun little challenge for you. I just want you to see if you can hit the subscribe button with your eyes closed. Give it a try. If it doesn't work, try it again with your eyes open. Almost works every time. So as I said in the intro, we're looking at a new way to value wide receivers in Dynasty. My friend David, who's a very sharp Dynasty analyst, he came up with his own method for classifying wide receivers into what he calls buckets. And to do this, he looked at over 1,000 wide receiver seasons from 2006 to 2022. And he looked at every wide receiver in that sample that had played in 8 or more games that season and averaged 5 or more targets per game. And then he broke all those seasons down into different groups based on their points per game. And he just started running tests on these groups to see which metrics could help him predict wide receiver production. Specifically, he's looking for metrics that correlate or metrics that scale in a linear fashion. So as points per game go up, these metrics go up. And he landed on these 4 metrics that he used to create his wide receiver buckets that I want to take a look at today. Those 4 metrics are target share, targets per out run, yards per out run, and weighted opportunity rating. So before we jump into his spreadsheet and take a look at that, I just want to really quickly go over those 4 things in case you're not familiar. Target share is just the percent of a team's total targets that one player can earn. So 20% target share on 100 targets would be 20 targets. Targets per route run is just targets divided by routes run. And it's another way of indicating how often you are targeted when you're on the field. Yards per route run is just receiving yards divided by routes run. And this sort of captures the same type of target earning ability, but it also mixes in efficiency as well, because obviously if every reception is going for more yards, then your yards per out run is going to be higher. And then finally, we have weighted opportunity rating, which is a way of combining target share with another stat called air yard share, which is the percentage of a team's air yards, as you might have guessed. And air yards are literally just the number of yards the ball travels in the air on all pass attempts. So not just completions, but incompletions too. We can calculate how many air yards a player has received based on all targets. So it's 1.5 times the target share plus 0.7 times the air yard share. And this metric, what it's trying to do is balance out players that have really high volume with lower average depth of targets. So they're getting targets close to the line of scrimmage versus players that have maybe fewer targets, but those go further downfield. So anyway, those are the 4 metrics along with points per game and also PFF's expected points per game that David used to create these wide receiver buckets, which I think is a really cool and innovative way of looking at wide receivers in Dynasty. So we're going to jump in now and take a look at his very aesthetically pleasing and color-coded spreadsheet. But if you want to take a closer look for yourself, David has agreed to make this available for free for anybody that wants to look at it. What you have to do is go over to Twitter and follow him at DSP4150. I'll put a link to his Twitter profile in the description. So go to his Twitter profile, give him a follow, and then just send him a message saying that you're looking for the wide receiver buckets, and I'm sure he'd be happy to fix you up with that. But my plan for this video is to just look at each different bucket that he has for grouping these wide receivers, talk about how this group is classified, and then I'm going to give some of my big takeaways from the wide receivers in each bucket. All right, so let's talk about how these buckets are actually defined. If you're looking at this graphic on the screen, you can see that there are 7 different categories. We're only going to talk about 6 of them. At the bottom left, you'll see one to be sorted. That's just the incoming rookie class. They still need to be sorted into these groups because they haven't put any NFL production on the field yet. And these buckets are specifically created based on the on-field play of NFL players. So it's not really about college profile or anything. It's about what are you doing on the field. We don't have any data on the rookies yet, so they're not in. They're in the to be sorted group. But then starting at the top, we have Cornerstone, and then CS Veteran. That would be Cornerstone and Cornerstone Veteran. And those are players that are projected to score about 16 or more points per game. So David is splitting them up into these groups based on what type of scoring output we can expect in the upcoming season. But they're also split by age as well. So any player that's expected to score 16 or more points per game, but is 28 years old or older, they go in the Cornerstone Veteran group. And then moving down to the next row, we have Watch List, which are any players that are from rookies up to year 3 that are projected to score between 12 and 16 points per game. So we call them the watch list because we're kind of watching to see if they're going to break out. Next, we have core, which are players in their prime age range. That's basically 25 to 27. And these are players that are projected to score between 12 and 16 points per game. And then we have a core veteran group, which is the same as core, but for 28 and older players. And then finally, we have at the bottom the to be sorted group I already mentioned, and the other guys, which is a great movie, but also it's all the wide receivers that are not rookies that are projected to score under 12 points per game. So literally just all the other guys. So what I love about this method is that it helps us to think more clearly about a player's purpose. These groups I'm about to show you, they're not linear rankings. They're not literally meant to tell you this player is better than this player. What they do is they tell you what a player can offer you. What purpose do they serve on your roster, right? Are you looking for a young wide receiver that you can comfortably start week to week? Or are you looking for more of an upside swing? Or are you just looking for the cheapest replacement level production that you can find on the market? Looking at this sort of grouping classification, I find that to be much more helpful than just looking at a set of rankings. So let's take a closer look at each of these buckets, and I'm going to give some of my high level takeaways. We're just going to go in the order that they're listed on the spreadsheet. So it starts with the Cornerstone Veteran group. We're going to take a look at that right now. So you'll notice here we have the player's age, and then next to that we have their FC val. So that's their fantasy calc value. Fantasy calc is a website much like Keep Trade Cut, where it compiles data to give a numerical value to players, except it's actually pulling trades from real dynasty leagues. So you could say it's probably more accurate, it's a little sharper, more reflective of what's going on in actual leagues. And David has put the fantasy calc value for each of these players in, and then in each bucket, the players are sorted by that value. So that's sort of a proxy for how the market sees these players. And it can be really interesting seeing how players within the same bucket are valued. So here in Cornerstone Veteran, we have your older elite or potentially formerly elite producers: Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, and Keenan Allen. Remember, to qualify for this group, you have to be 28 and older and project for 16 or more points per game in the current season. So pretty exclusive club here. These are some of the greatest wide receivers in Dynasty over the past half decade or so. And I think the most interesting player in this group is Tyreek Hill because his fantasy calc value is nearly double the rest. So when I see this group, my first question is this warranted? Should Hill be valued this way? And if we scroll over, we can take a look at his yards per outrun and his targets per outrun. Remember, those are two of the metrics that we really care about here. And these two numbers to me confirm, yes, he truly stands alone among veteran wide receivers. His yards per outrun, head and shoulders above the rest of this group over the last 2 seasons. His targets per outrun, well ahead of this group over the last 2 seasons. He just stands alone in this age group, and his value gap from him to the next guy is truly warranted because he has an ability to break leagues that we just haven't seen from the rest of this group in a couple of years. Next, we'll take a look at the Cornerstone classification, and these are really your young studs, your superstar wide receivers. This group starts with Justin Jefferson and then goes CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson, AJ Brown, and Chris Olave. Now, you might be thinking, what's Chris Olave doing here? He doesn't belong in this group. I disagree. I think Chris Olave is awesome. I think his peripheral numbers have been really, really strong, and he hasn't been helped out by situations, but still a believer. But I want to talk about Garrett Wilson here because when you scroll over and you take a look at points per game, his career high points per game is so much lower than everyone else in this group, including Chris Olave, had a better points per game season than Wilson. And so at first glance, we might wonder, why should he be grouped in with these names? But when we check out his target share and his weighted opportunity rating, or Whopper, 0.298 target share last year, 29.8%. That's almost identical to CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and AJ Brown. And his Whopper, 0.762, the highest in this group last year. So what that indicates is he's not only dominating targets on the Jets, but he's also dominating air yards. His offensive situation has been horrible, which has led to this poor points per game. But when it comes to earning targets, which he has the most control over as a player, he really looks like an elite wide receiver. And he's a guy that I want to buy into because I think he has a good chance assuming Rodgers is healthy this year, to jump into that Jefferson and Lamb and Chase group. Moving on to the watch list here, there are no rookies yet. So this is just year 2 and year 3 wide receivers that have not yet cracked the cornerstone tier. They project somewhere between 12 and 16 points per game. And at the top, we have Drake London, followed by Zay Flowers, George Pickens, Tank Dell, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jordan Addison, Jaden Reed, Rashee Rice, Christian Watson, and Josh Downs. No doubt some of the most contentious names in Dynasty here, because these are the guys where we haven't fully seen it yet, but there are still a lot of believers because they're very young players. So this is an interesting group to look at. There's a huge disparity between Drake London and the rest of the guys in this group. And that's just a reflection of the expectations on him. He has had an impressive first 2 years in terms of his peripheral numbers. Points per game has been very low. Falcons passing game has been a disaster. He hasn't quite done enough to put himself in that cornerstone group, but underdog drafters are taking him as a top 12 wide receiver. There are high expectations that a breakout is coming with Kirk Cousins. That is why he is so valuable compared to the rest of the guys here. But I want to highlight Tank Dell and Rashee Rice here, who are two guys that I love in Dynasty and in best ball, frankly. They were the only two to put up elite marks in yards per out run last season. So now's a good time, I guess, to mention there are good and elite numbers for each metric that this spreadsheet has, and they're listed at the top. And David came up with these thresholds by basically averaging out the metrics of the players in his study, that 2006 to 2022. He looked at their targets per out run and their yards per out run and their target shares, and he kind of averaged them out based on their points per game. So an elite number is like, if you are in the wide receiver 1 conversation, what is your yards per out run? Well, Rashee Rice and Tank Dell both hit that threshold of 2.2 yards per out run last season as rookies. Neither of them had full-time roles for the full season. Tank Dell due to injury, Rashee Rice due to being kind of eased into a wide receiver rotation. But each of them had a stretch of really, really impressive play on the field. They had stretches of impactful production, and they both play with elite quarterbacks. So these are two guys that I'm targeting in Dynasty, specifically over other wide receivers in this group, like Jaden Reed, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Jordan Addison. Okay, the next bucket is your core wide receivers. So these are your post year 3 wide receivers that are younger than 28. So prime age, all these guys are between 25 and 27, and they're all expected to score between 12 and 16 points per game. Now, that doesn't mean any of these players can't break out and do more than that. Last year, Nico Collins, on the back of incredible efficiency, scored 17 points per game, but he hasn't been moved into the cornerstone group just because his underlying numbers don't necessarily suggest he's going to repeat that. Like his PFF expected points per game was, I think, like 13.5 or something like that. So he outperformed his usage, still a very good wide receiver, but he belongs in this group of core guys. They're kind of in that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range. And this is a hard one to parse through in Dynasty as well. These guys seem to move around a lot just based on who had the best game or who had the best season the previous year. I think for the most part, though, I'm kind of okay fading this group. Not that I don't want to roster them, but I don't go out of my way to get wide receivers in this range because I don't think they're going to burn me. I don't think it's terribly likely that any of these wide receivers is ever going to jump into like the second round of startups conversation again. Just based on their age and what we've seen from them so far. In fact, this entire group across all of their careers just has 3 combined seasons above 16 points per game. In other words, we're really not seeing that wide receiver 1 level production out of these guys. Doesn't mean they're worthless. It just means that they are kind of expensive because of longevity and not necessarily because of high-end production. So just some quick notes here on some of the guys in this core group. Jakobi Meyers stands out as a player who might be a value in deeper Dynasty leagues. If you start 3 wide receivers and 2 flex or something like that, he's been sneaky consistent, 13 points per game in the last 2 seasons, and he's much cheaper than everybody else in this bucket. T. Higgins is probably the best value in this group. His 2021 is actually the 4th best points per game season of anyone in this group, and he's the 2nd youngest player here. It's not necessarily that I think Higgins is likely to outscore all these players. It's more so that I think they're very interchangeable on a year-to-year basis. So I want to invest in whoever I'm getting the discount on at that time. But if I were to pick anybody out of this group to jump into that cornerstone tier, it would be Jalen Waddle, who put up elite numbers in targets per out run and yards per out run last season. He just left some games early with injury, so his points per game is lagging behind those peripheral numbers. But if Tyreek Hill were to miss time, or let's say he retired after this season or something, I'm confident that he could put up wide receiver one numbers. There's just two more groups left. And next we have these core veterans, which have the same kind of point projection as the core guys, 12 to 16, but these are 28 and older wide receivers. It starts with Deebo Samuel and Mike Evans, Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley, Chris Godwin, Deontay Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Williams, Tyler Lockett, and Adam Thielen. So a very wide range of value, very wide range of ages. I want to focus in on Deebo Samuel here, who I'm a little bit lower on, and Deontay Johnson, who I'm a little bit higher on. And this comes back to expected points per game, which is one of the metrics on this spreadsheet. I think it's sourced from PFF. And looking at just usage over the past 3 seasons, we really should expect similar results for Deontay and Deebo. The problem is Deebo has really outperformed his usage, and that's partly due to his yards after catch ability. He's very physically gifted. It's also partly due to the Shanahan scheme. But we even saw in 2022, Deebo Samuel, he came in below his expected points per game, had kind of a down year. So even he's not immune from efficiency regression, whereas Deontay just can't catch a break in these dysfunctional Pittsburgh passing games, or at least he couldn't until now. Now he's in Carolina. Who knows, whether Bryce Young is the guy or not, whether this offense will be capable or not. But with Deontay being so much cheaper than some of the other guys in this group and actually having one of the more impressive target earning profiles among them, I like investing in Deontay at his price point because it's already baked in that he's going to be inefficient, that the Panthers offense is going to be bad. But what if it isn't? Right? What if they do take a step forward? None of that is being baked in. I would like to take a swing on that because I think even if Carolina's offense is pretty ho-hum, Deontay can pay off his price just by being a guy that can command 28% of the targets. And finally, this brings us to the other guys. I'm not going to read through this entire tier because it's very long, but at the top, we have Jamison Williams, Romeo Doubs, Jahan Dotson, Jerry Jeudy, Dontavian Wicks, Cortland Sutton, Quentin Johnston, Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel. You get the idea. These are the leftovers. Everybody that's projected to score under 12 points per game, that is not a rookie. These players just don't project to provide meaningful production because their underlying metrics are also uninspiring. And I'm not very interested in investing in these guys because for the most part, there's just not a lot of hope for them to see big value gains. We can pretty much rule out any of them being elite producers at any point in their careers. The only exceptions I'm really willing to make are for Dontavian Wicks and Demario Douglas. Those are year 2 guys. They didn't have full-time roles as rookies, and so we have limited samples on them. I think it's still possible that there's more to their games than we know, and they both do have some interesting points to their profiles. Demario Douglas, high targets per out run player in a abysmal Patriots offense. Dontavian Wicks, high yards per out run in a crowded wide receiver room. So I'm willing to leave a light on for those guys, see if they can get out of the other guys group and into the watch list group sometime this season. Those are the wide receiver buckets. That's going to do it for today's video. Remember, if you want to take a closer look at David's spreadsheet that I've been showing you screenshots from throughout the video, all you have to do is go over to his Twitter profile, link in the description. It's at DSP4150. Give him a follow and then send him a nice DM asking to get the link to the spreadsheet. Make sure you say please. I'm sure that he will set you up with that. I do want to give David a big shout out for making this incredibly cool resource free for us to take a look at, making it available for me to break down on the channel. I do think it's really useful. I think it's a really cool way to think about the wide receiver position. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to see more Dynasty content just like this, and I will see you all in the next one.